The newspapers printed it in bold, black letters that seemed to scream from every corner store and coffee shop table. The talk shows debated it with furrowed brows and heavy sighs. The neighbors whispered it behind cupped hands, peering through lace curtains as if the very air around his apartment might be contaminated. Fritz Honka. A name that had become shorthand for everything broken, everything irredeemable, everything that society wanted to lock away and forget. But here is what the headlines never tell you: the worst humans are rarely born that way. They are carved, slowly, by hands they never see. And sometimes, just sometimes, they find a reason to put down the knife. The story begins not in the dimly lit bars of Hamburg's red light district, where the real Fritz Honka committed his unspeakable acts, but in a small, forgotten corner of a city that could be anywhere: Chicago, perhaps, or Cleveland, or any other place where winter bites hard and hope grows brittle. Our Fritz Honka is not the killer of history. He is a construction worker with hands like cracked leather, a man who has not spoken a kind word to anyone in 17 years. He lives alone in a basement apartment that smells of mildew and regret, and every morning he wakes up angry at the sun for daring to rise. Fritz was not always this way. There was a time, decades ago, when he had been a boy with soft eyes and a habit of rescuing injured birds. His mother had called him her little healer, and she would tell anyone who listened that Fritz would grow up to do great things. But his mother died when he was 12, and his father, a man who measured love in how hard he could swing his belt, beat the softness out of him before the year was out. By 14, Fritz had learned that kindness was a weakness. By 18, he had forgotten how to smile. By 35, he had perfected the art of pushing people away before they could get close enough to hurt him. Now, at 52, he was exactly where he had always feared he would be: utterly, completely, irrevocably alone. The winter had been brutal. Not the kind of winter that makes for pretty postcards, but the kind that seeps into your bones and whispers that spring might never come. Fritz had not spoken to another human being in 11 days, not since he had grunted at the cashier in the hardware store while buying a new padlock for his door. He had stopped going to the small diner where he used to eat his meals because the waitress, a young woman named Delia with kind eyes and a lazy smile, had started asking him how he was doing. Genuinely asking. As if she cared. And that had been too much. That had felt like a trap. So Fritz stayed in his basement, eating canned beans and drinking cheap whiskey, and he told himself this was fine. This was what he wanted. This was what he deserved. But life, as it always does, had other plans. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that starts grey and gets worse. Fritz was walking home from the liquor store, a brown paper bag tucked under his arm, when he heard the sound. It was a small sound, barely audible over the wind, but something about it made him stop. It was a cry. Not a human cry, not exactly, but close enough to make his chest tighten in a way he had not felt in years. He turned his head and saw her. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, huddled against the wall of a closed bakery. She was wearing a thin purple coat that was too small for her, and her hair was a tangled mess of dark curls. She was crying, not the loud wailing of a child throwing a tantrum, but the quiet, hopeless sobbing of someone who has realized that no one is coming. Fritz should have kept walking. Every instinct he had built over the past 4 decades told him to keep walking. Do not get involved. Do not care. Caring is the first step toward getting hurt. But his feet would not move. The girl looked up, and for a moment, time stopped. Her eyes were brown, the exact same shade as his mother's had been. And in those eyes, Fritz saw something he recognized: fear. Not fear of him, not yet, but fear of the world. Fear of being too small, too young, too alone. Fear that no one would ever come. "Hey," Fritz said, and his voice came out rough, unused. It sounded like gravel being poured down a drain. The girl flinched, and he saw her press herself harder against the wall. Smart girl, he thought. Stranger danger. Someone had taught her well. He took a step back, then another, putting distance between them. He held up his hands, the brown paper bag crinkling. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. The words felt foreign in his mouth, like a language he had forgotten long ago. "Are you lost?" The girl sniffled and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I'm waiting for my mom," she whispered. "She said she would be right back. But that was a long time ago." Fritz looked around. The street was empty. The bakery was closed, its windows dark. A sign on the door said back in 15 minutes, but the ink was smudged and the paper was yellowed. That sign had been there for weeks, maybe months. This was not a place where anyone was coming back to. How long? Fritz asked. The girl shrugged, a tiny movement that broke something inside him. I don't know. The sun was higher. Fritz calculated. It was 3 in the afternoon. In December, the sun was highest around noon. This child had been sitting here for at least 3 hours. In the cold. In a coat that was too small. Waiting for a mother who might not be coming back. Something hot and unfamiliar rose in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as anger. Not the cold, bitter anger he carried with him everywhere, but a different kind. A protective kind. The kind his mother used to have when she stood between him and his father's belt. What's your name? He asked. Emily, she said. Then, after a pause, are you a bad man? The question hit him like a physical blow. He thought about the newspapers that would never write about him, about the neighbors who crossed the street when they saw him coming, about the 17 years of silence and the 11 days of nothing. He thought about the padlock on his door and the whiskey in his bag and the emptiness that had become his only companion. Yes, he said honestly. I think I might be. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something that terrified him more than any threat or accusation ever could. She smiled. It was a small smile, shaky and uncertain, but it was real. My daddy was a bad man too, she said. But he got better. Before he went away. Fritz did not know what to say to that. He had never gotten better. He had only gotten harder, colder, more locked away. But here was this child, this tiny person in a purple coat, looking at him like he might be something other than a monster. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wanted to be. Come on, he said, and the words surprised him even as he spoke them. There's a diner around the corner. We can wait for your mom there. It's warm. They have hot chocolate. Emily hesitated. He could see the war playing out on her face, the lessons about strangers, the fear, the cold. The cold one. She nodded and pushed herself to her feet, and Fritz noticed for the first time that she was wearing mismatched shoes. One red, one blue. Both too thin for the snow. They walked in silence to the diner. It was the same one Fritz had stopped going to, the one with the waitress named Delia who asked how he was doing. When they walked through the door, the bell jingling overhead, Delia looked up from wiping down the counter. Her eyes went wide when she saw Fritz, then wider when she saw Emily. Fritz, she said. You came back. And you brought, is this your granddaughter? No, Fritz said gruffly. Found her outside. She's lost. Waiting for her mom. Delia's expression softened in a way that made Fritz uncomfortable. She knelt down so she was eye level with Emily. Hey there, sweetheart. I'm Delia. You must be freezing. How about that hot chocolate, extra whipped cream? Emily nodded, and Delia whisked her away to a booth near the window. Fritz stood frozen by the door, unsure of what to do now. He had done his part. He had brought her somewhere warm. He could leave. He should leave. That was what he always did. He left before anyone could expect anything from him. But his feet carried him to the booth, and his body sat down across from Emily, and his hands set the brown paper bag on the seat beside him. He watched as Delia brought over a mug of hot chocolate so tall it seemed to defy physics, piled high with whipped cream and chocolate shavings. Emily's eyes went wide, and she let out a small gasp of delight that made something crack in Fritz's chest. Thank you, Emily said, looking at Fritz. Then she looked at Delia. Thank you both. Delia caught Fritz's eye and raised an eyebrow. He knew what she was asking. Are you okay? Do you need anything? He looked away. For the next hour, Fritz sat in silence while Emily drank her hot chocolate and Delia bustled around the diner, checking on the few other customers. Emily talked. She talked about her school, about her favorite cartoon, about the cat that lived in the alley behind her apartment building. She talked the way children talk when they are used to being ignored, filling the silence with words because silence had never been kind to her. And Fritz listened. He did not say much, just grunted occasionally, but he listened. He learned that Emily's mother worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. He learned that her father had gone away to a place where he could get help for his sadness and his anger. He learned that Emily had been waiting outside the bakery because her mother had promised to take her there for a special treat, but her mother's phone had died and her shift had run late and she had forgotten. He learned that Emily had not eaten since breakfast. "Delia," Fritz said, his voice louder than he intended. "Bring her a grilled cheese. And fries. And another hot chocolate." Delia smiled. It was a knowing smile, the kind that said she had seen this before, the kind that said she had been waiting for it. "Coming right up." Emily looked at him with those brown eyes. "You don't have to," she said. "I don't have any money." "Neither do I," Fritz lied. He had money. He had plenty of money, actually, because he never spent it on anything except rent, whiskey, and canned beans. "But Delia owes me a favor." From behind the counter, Delia snorted. "I owe you nothing, Fritz Honka. But the grilled cheese is on the house anyway." While Emily ate, Fritz watched the door. He watched it because he was waiting for someone to come looking for her, but also because he was afraid of what would happen when they did. Once her mother arrived, his role in this story would be over. He would go back to his basement, back to his whiskey, back to his silence. And that would be that. But something had changed. He could feel it, a small warm thing growing in the cold space where his heart used to be. He did not want to go back. He wanted to stay here, in this warm diner, across from this small girl who looked at him like he was not a monster. He wanted to be the person she seemed to think he was. At 5 o'clock, the diner door burst open and a woman rushed in, her eyes wild, her coat unbuttoned, her hair a mess. She looked like she had been crying. She looked like she had been running. She looked like a mother who had realized, too late, what she had almost lost. "Emily," she cried, and Emily jumped up from the booth and ran into her arms. "Oh my God, Emily, I'm so sorry, my phone died, and my boss made me stay late, and I forgot, I'm so sorry." "It's okay, Mama," Emily said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "I was scared, but then the bad man found me and brought me here. And he bought me hot chocolate. And grilled cheese." The mother looked up, and her eyes found Fritz. He saw the fear flash across her face, the instinctive assessment: older man, rough appearance, basement dweller, probably dangerous. But then she looked at her daughter, safe and warm and full of hot chocolate, and the fear softened into something else. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you so much. I don't know how to, I don't have much, but I can pay you back for the food." "No," Fritz said, standing up. He was suddenly desperate to leave, to escape before this moment could ruin him. "No payment. Just, take care of her. She's a good kid." "Wait," the mother said. "Please. What's your name?" Fritz hesitated. He thought about the newspapers that would never write about him, about the neighbors who crossed the street, about the man he had been for 17 years. He thought about the girl who had called him a bad man and then smiled anyway. "Fritz," he said. "Fritz Honka." The mother nodded, as if committing it to memory. "Thank you, Fritz Honka. You're not what I expected." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." He left the diner before she could say anything else. The cold hit him like a wall, but it didn't feel as biting as it had before. He walked home in the dark, the brown paper bag still tucked under his arm, and when he got to his basement apartment, he did something he had not done in years. He set the whiskey bottle on the counter, unopened. Then he sat down in his worn armchair and stared at the wall. And for the first time in a very long time, he cried. The next day, Fritz went back to the diner. Delia raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. She just poured him a cup of coffee and set it in front of him. Black, no sugar. Just the way he liked it. "Emily came by this morning," Delia said casually. "Her mother wanted to thank you again. Left this for you." She slid a piece of paper across the counter. It was a drawing, done in crayon, clearly the work of a 7-year-old. It showed 3 figures, a tall woman with brown hair, a small girl with purple coat, and a large, scowling man with grey hair. Above them, in wobbly letters, Emily had written, "M.Y. Heroes." Fritz stared at the drawing. His hand shook as he picked it up. He had never been anyone's hero. He had never even been anyone's friend. He had spent 52 years on this earth convincing himself that he didn't need anyone, that caring was weakness, that the only safe way to live was alone. But here was proof, in Crane, that he had been wrong. "She's a good kid," Delia said softly. "Reminds me of someone I used to know." Fritz looked up. "Who?" "You," Delia said. "Before you decided to become invisible." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to argue, to deflect, to push her away like he had pushed everyone else away. But no words came. Because she was right. He had made himself invisible. He had chosen the basement and the silence and the whiskey. He had chosen to be the man everyone crossed the street to avoid. But maybe, just maybe, he could choose something else. It started small. The next week, Fritz showed up at the diner and asked Delia if she needed help with anything. She put him to work washing dishes, and he did it without complaint. The week after that, he fixed the squeaky door that had been annoying Delia for months. The week after that, he shoveled the sidewalk in front of the diner after a snowstorm, even though no one had asked him to. And every few days, Emily and her mother would come into the diner. Emily would run to Fritz and show him her latest drawing, tell him about her day, ask him questions he didn't know how to answer. Her mother would watch from a nearby booth, her eyes soft, and she would mouth the words "thank you" across the room. Fritz never knew what to say to that either. So he just nodded, gruff and uncomfortable, and went back to washing dishes. But something was changing inside him. It was slow, like ice melting in spring, but it was real. The anger that had lived in his chest for so long began to loosen its grip. The silence that had been his only companion began to feel less like safety and more like loneliness. And the wall he had built around himself, brick by brick, year by year, began to show cracks. One night, about 2 months after he had found Emily outside the bakery, Fritz was closing up the diner with Delia. They were wiping down tables and counting tips, and the radio was playing soft music in the background. It was an ordinary night, the kind that seemed unimportant in the moment but would later feel like a turning point. "Can I ask you something?" Delia said, not looking up from her cash register. "Sure. Why did you stop coming here? Before, I mean. You used to come every day, and then one day you just disappeared." Fritz considered lying. He considered deflecting. He considered all the old habits that had kept him safe for so long. But then he thought about Emily's drawing, still folded in his wallet, worn at the edges from being looked at too many times. "Because you asked how I was doing," he said quietly. "And I didn't know how to answer. I didn't think anyone actually cared." Delia stopped counting. She looked up at him, and her eyes were wet. "Fritz," she said. "I asked because I did care. I always cared. You just never let me in." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." It was the first time he had apologized for anything in years. It felt strange and terrifying and, somehow, exactly right. The spring came, slow and tentative, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. But it came. The snow melted, and the trees budded, and the world remembered how to be green. Emily turned 8, and Fritz bought her a new coat with his own money. It was purple, like her old one, but this one fit. When he gave it to her, she threw her arms around his waist and hugged him so tight he thought his ribs might break. "Thank you, Fritz," she said. "You're not a bad man anymore." He looked down at her, this small person who had seen something in him that he had never been able to see in himself. And he realized, with a clarity that took his breath away, that she was right. He wasn't the same man who had walked past her that cold Tuesday in December. That man had been one of the worst humans to ever exist, not because he had committed crimes, but because he had given up. Because he had decided that he wasn't worth saving. But here was the truth that the newspapers never printed, that the talk shows never debated, that the neighbors never whispered: no one is beyond redemption. No one is too far gone. No one is so broken that they cannot be put back together, piece by piece, by something as simple as a child's smile or a waitress's kindness or a stranger's willingness to stop and ask if you're okay. Fritz Honka died that winter, in a way. The angry man in the basement, the one who had built walls around his heart, the one who had convinced himself that he was alone because he deserved to be alone, that man was gone. In his place stood someone else. Someone who washed dishes and shoveled snow and bought purple coats. Someone who said I'm sorry and meant it. Someone who had learned, at 52 years old, that it was never too late to become the person his mother always believed he could be. The last scene of this story takes place on a warm evening in June. Fritz is sitting on a bench outside the diner, watching the sun set over the city. Beside him is Emily, now 8.5 and growing like a weed. In front of them, the street is alive with people, couples walking hand in hand, children chasing each other, old men playing chess on a folding table. Fritz, Emily says. Yeah. Do you think my daddy will get better? Like you did? Fritz looks down at her, and for once, he doesn't look away. He thinks about his own father, about the belt and the bruises and the years of silence. He thinks about how easy it is to become the thing you fear. And he thinks about how hard it is to change. Yeah, he says, and he believes it. I think he will. Emily smiles, that same small, shaky, real smile she gave him on the worst day of his life. And Fritz smiles back. It is a rusty smile, unpracticed and uneven, but it is real. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere inside the diner, Delia is playing a song on the jukebox, something old and sweet that Fritz hasn't heard in years. And for the first time in a very long time, Fritz Honka feels something he had forgotten existed. He feels hope. And that, more than anything, is how you save a life. Not with grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but with small acts of kindness, repeated over and over, until the person on the receiving end finally believes they are worthy of love. It is how you save yourself. It is how you save the world. One lost child at a time. One broken man at a time. One moment of choosing to care when it would be easier to walk away. Fritz Honka, one of the worst humans to ever exist, learned that lesson on a cold Tuesday in December. And he spent every day after that trying to prove it was true. Maybe we can too.